Okay, good afternoon. This is quite a pleasant surprise to outdo ourselves with the audience. My name is Dele Ogunseyitan. I'm professor and chair in public health. And today we open up our spring quarter with a very special program. We could have asked for the main hall at the University Club, but we thought, it's just us public health. It's just Professor Cam. Maybe people will show up, maybe they won't. But I'm so thrilled to have the audience turn out from all over campus. And in the interest of time, I'm going to introduce our speaker briefly, and then we will hopefully have some time for questions and discussion. And we are able to be here until 2 p.m. Discussions are always welcome afterward. And I encourage you all to look at the speakers we have scheduled for the rest of the quarter. Most of those will take place at the McDonnell Douglas Auditorium, but we always do the lunch thing, so feel free to come to the talks and stay for lunch afterward. Today, we're really delighted to welcome Dr. Kalanta Zadeh to program in public health, to UC Irvine actually. He left UCLA for UC Irvine last year, and promptly we had discussions about his interest in public health, and we processed his appointment in the program. He received his undergraduate degree in medicine from the University of Bonn in Germany, and his MD degree from the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg, also in Germany. And then he came to the United States to get a master's in public health in epidemiology, and subsequently a PhD also in epidemiology at UC Berkeley. He's a practicing triple board certified physician, specialist in internal medicine, pediatrics, and nephrology. He did residency at State University of New York in nephrology, and then at UC San Francisco. He came here to lead the division of nephrology, and he is best known for his hypothesis about the longevity of individuals with chronic disease states, also known as reverse epidemiology. I had to go look that up to make sure I read it well and that we wrote the announcement well. But here to explain it all to us, Professor Cam Kalanta Zadeh. Please join me to welcome him.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
you. Well, thank you, Professor Ogunseyitan. It's a great honor for me and distinct pleasure to be here. It's been now 8 months ever since I moved from UCLA, which is not very far from here. I still maintain some ties. Some of my students have continued coming here, and I'm still working with colleagues at UCLA. So I know that we don't have much time. I would like to move on further. I'm warning you that today's topic is somewhat provocative, but it will be, you will notice it has, it will be relevant to what you're doing right now. That means enjoying lunch. So with that, I also would like to ask you to help me with some ideas, because ever since I've come here, I'm relatively intrigued by Disneyland vicinity. I even tried from my office, I walked to Disneyland, and it took 35 minutes. So I feel that we should take advantage of that. There are things such as medical tourism. I've seen this in China, in other countries. These are people in our division we're very proud of. And Dr. Vaziri, who was chief of nephrology, is also here today among us.
May I have to volume a little bit?
Yes. Harold Simmons Center for Kidney Disease Research and Epidemiology was established at Harvard, UCLA, and UCLA, and it moved here. And I'll show you some of the research we do here. And this is also one of the areas I'm interested, so that you see it's nutrition, and some of the data I'm sharing with you comes from the textbook. This is the third edition, just came out. Finally, the so-called disclosure of financial relationships. I work with a number of companies in addition to NIH and other things, as you can see. So I start with the definition of chronic kidney disease. Around 11 years ago, the National Kidney Foundation decided, experts in the National Kidney Foundation decided, they felt that it's important to come up with a uniform definition of kidney disease that is chronic. And they said that any kidney disease that lasts more than 3 months is called chronic kidney disease. And that was the end of decades of confusion and not having a unified definition. And the 2 criteria were proposed. One is kidney function being below certain level that I explained, and the second one is actually the first one is the second one is below certain level kidney function more than 3 months, and the first one is also having certain other criteria such as structural damage to the kidney. But as I said, the definition is more than 3 months. Now, also for the sake of clinicians, chronic kidney disease was divided into 5 stages. And this has more clinical implication. And now it also has public health implication, because once you define something, now you go to the public, you go across the population. How many thousand Americans have chronic kidney disease? And how many thousand Americans have chronic kidney disease stage 3, 4, and 5, which is more serious? And chronic kidney disease, per definition, is a disease. When you have it, there is no cure. You're going to continue to have it for the rest of your life, and you're just going to get worse. Progressive chronic disease. It's similar to many other chronic diseases. Once you have it, there is no cure, and once you have it, there is no other direction. The direction is only getting worse. Bypassing this is just the coding and other things. So now it is believed that there are more than 20, that means over 20 million people with chronic kidney disease in the United States. This was the early estimate in 2002, or actually the first one was 1998 and 2002. So the estimate was 20 to 30 million Americans. That means around 10%. Then the further estimates, as you can see, a paper in JAMA by Hopkins College, Joe Koresh, and you see the bar which shows the estimate, the millions of Americans in each group. For example, 3.6, 6.5, 15.5 in stage 3. The problem with this estimate is that stage 3 has more people than stage 1 and 2, but usually with chronic diseases you have to see the opposite. It has to be like a pyramid or reverse pyramid. So this system has been criticized, and as you can imagine, now that in 2010, 11, and 12, and 13, there are emerging economies that are bypassing us. I even used this terminology, including China. I was in China 2 weeks ago. I was quite impressed. Each time I go to China and India, I'm impressed how fast they're moving. So they came up with an enhanced study based on what we did, what we have been doing, and their own enhanced study, which was published in Lancet last year. Last year, one issue of Lancet was just dedicated to China, public health and medical issues in China. And one paper, and where they invited me to write an editorial, was about China. Well, it was about chronic kidney disease in China. And as you can see here in the United States, are estimated CKD patients, chronic kidney disease is 26 million. China estimated, and they did a greater job than we did, is 120 million. That means 120 million Chinese have chronic kidney disease. It's like half a population of the United States, right? So it's amazing, and they were, in my opinion, more accurate because they showed that the stage 3 is less than stage 2. So stage 1 is the highest, the 2, then 3, 1.6. So their estimate was more like a reverse pyramid as compared to our estimates. And then a lot of challenges here. For example, here in the United States, we cover all costs of stage 5 or terminal chronic kidney disease. They still are struggling, but the health system is moving very fast with coverage for everybody, including for dialysis treatment. They're still working on that. So renal replacement therapy, that means something that you may have heard, dialysis treatment. If you don't have kidney function, if you're stage 5, less than 10% left, you can survive without kidney dialysis treatment 3 times a week. Or kidney transplant, which happens only in 5%. And they have only 50,000 dialysis patients. We have 500,000. Our estimate is in 5 years from now, they will have over 1 million patients on dialysis in China. So now with that, I mentioned the keyword dialysis. So a dialysis patient is a patient with stage 5 or terminal chronic kidney disease who cannot survive without that, what we call kidney replacement therapy treatment, or kidney replacement or renal replacement therapy. In the United States, we have 500,000 people on dialysis. That means 3 times a week they come to a place called dialysis clinic. We have one of them, a good one, at the University of California, Irvine Orange campus, which was created 30 years ago under Dr. Vaziri. And we have 200 of those patients, and there are 5,000 dialysis clinics in the United States. For those who are interested in history of medicine, this is very interesting because in 1973, 40 years ago, for the first and last time until today, the first socialist medicine happened in the United States by allowing anybody who needs dialysis, even at the age of 20 or 30, to become Medicare beneficiary. So 40 years ago, for the first and last time, the only disease entity that Congress decided to cover everybody without any question was chronic kidney disease stage 5, which is called end-stage renal disease those days, and which is covered 100%. Even if we have here people from Mexico coming here without any visa or citizenship, we cover them free. Dialysis in the United States, we are quite proud, has been free, so socialist medicine almost 100%. So now moving on here now with this challenging question, and dialysis costs $60,000 a year per dialysis patient. 10% Medicare budget, Medicare type Part B budget goes to dialysis. Now this question, spend so much money, so much efforts so that this patient live longer. So which of the following diseases has a 5-year survival less than 35%? Breast cancer, colon cancer, heart attack, a patient on dialysis. Now you can imagine, of course, you're all smart, and when I put this question, you can even guess. So this is the smart ones that don't even need the knowledge. They're gonna say, okay, so this guy has some reasons to put this question. And that's the irony. That means we are spending so much money, 40 years, first and last socialist medicine, 60,000 a year, 500,000 people on dialysis, and they do worse than most fatal cancer. And not in the United States. In every country you go, in the United Kingdom, 5-year survival is worse than most cancer patients on dialysis. As you can see, this is like next to most fatal cancers. Now that means 1 out of every 5 patients dies. So if I right now, this morning in dialysis patient, I saw 5 faces, 1 of them is dead in 12 months from now. Now, of course, it has been argued that these are very sick people. A patient who has terminal kidney disease pretty much has terminal everything else. They usually are diabetic patients. They don't have legs. They cannot see. Many other problems, but still that is not acceptable, such a high mortality. And this is one of the nice examples of comparing dialysis patients. A 40-year-old dialysis patient, a 40-year-old dialysis patient rate has the same risk, cardiovascular risk, as an 80-year-old person in the general population. So this is the cardiovascular mortality of general population as we get older. This is cardiovascular burden and mortality of dialysis patients. So a 40-year-old dialysis patient similar is an 80-year-old person not on dialysis. So 40 to 100 times higher risk. And as to what the cause of death is, most of them cardiovascular death is what I usually sign on the death certificate. So every year I sign 20 or 30 of these myself, and usually I put cardiovascular disease. Now, is it because cardiovascular disease is so high because dialysis patients have high rate of hypertension, obesity, cholesterol, and many of them are minorities? This is another thing that I have 1 hour talk about dialysis patients in whom 500,000 of them, 35% of them are African Americans. African Americans are only 14% of the US population, but when you go to our dialysis clinics across the nation, 1/3 of dialysis patients are African American. So altogether, mortality is high and we don't know why. So I have listed here a few things. Now I'm going to switch gear and come back here. Just think of a movie that started with something else, now a new story, and the story here is about obesity. And then I relate it to dialysis patients. Obesity is on the rise, right? All countries in the past 40 years, obesity from India to China to old Europe to United States, everywhere you go, BMI is on the rise, right? Now, many problems with obesity, especially abdominal obesity, so 1 to 10 hours of talk just about obesity, adverse events, adverse outcomes. So how do we quantify obesity? So far, the first and the only thing that we have, of course not the only thing, but the one that is used is still BMI. Ketele from Belgium came up with this idea, weight divided by some square or cubic of height is the best metric for obesity, right? And hopefully all of you sitting here knowing your BMI. Is your BMI 21, 23? And this was and still is the at least the screening or first step towards quantifying obesity. And normal body mass index is 18.5 to 25 according to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood, NHLBI, some 15 years ago. And 25, I'm sorry, this is 20. 25 to 30 is called overweight, right? And above 30 is called obesity. Obesity and morbid obesity here. Now, most data, there are hundreds of papers, millions of patients showing that high BMI, both in men and women, is associated with higher mortality, right? BMI 23, 30, 35, mortality is higher. But look at here too, low BMI is not good either, right? That's the first comment about this. Now, here again, high BMI, another paper, 1.4 million people, higher BMI above 25, mortality is higher. Low is not good either. So the question is, what's the sweet point? Is it 20 to 25? Is it 18.5 to 25 as NIH defined once? Is it different in China compared to the United States? Is it different in this part of California compared to the other part of California? What is the best BMI? Is it different in you compared to your sister and brother? So is there black and white BMI, or is BMI or even obesity definition should be individualized? So that's, I think, the next question that needs to be done, and is already people have started. Now look at here. I was in Joslin Institute. I was actually I'm in an NIH study section, and one of my NIH study section colleagues is an endocrinologist from Joslin, and he comes originally from Italy. He says, look, Cam, I agree with all these papers you have written about Obesity Paradox, and this is my mother. She's 72 years old. She came from Italy to pay a visit to the son and went to the clinic, and the doctor says that, look, your BMI is 41, you have to lose weight. All right? And she says, no, I'm not gonna lose weight. I go back to Italy, I'm very happy, I eat pizza and everything. So she was very disappointed. And the doctor says, no, you have come to this country, this is our rule, 41 is too high. Then she says that you are all wrong, because my own mother is 97 years old in Italy, and her BMI is, as you can see, is not low either. And she's 97, and she never she didn't ever listen to anyone to lose weight. Why should I lose weight? All right? So this is of course, I'm not making a rule out of only a mother and daughter, but this is what we have seen. And then there was a paper published in JAMA in January. Probably I've heard in National Public Radio. It made a lot of noises and a lot of interviews that they found, and this is not the first paper, that the best BMI associated with the lowest mortality is not normal BMI in the US and in most countries anymore. It's 25 to 30 overweight. They live the longest. So this led to a lot of interviews, actually. I myself was interviewed by CNN, New York Times, and other papers coming in Nature with lots of interviews about this obesity paradox. Now look at here. These are role models of 21st century. And I have 3 young daughters, so they look at these people all the time. They think they have to look like them. And if you go to Vienna, the
symbol of health thousands of years ago was a relatively chubby woman. So next time you go to Naturhistorisches Museum in Vienna, Natural History of Museum, this was what, and in my opinion, until recently, we adored, until World War II probably, chubby children were considered good, healthy children, right? Ask your grandmother. She would always tell you that, look, a chubby child is healthier than a thin one. Now, so therefore, I found this quite interesting, that it is a change in culture, not biology. That means I don't think that our genes have changed. That if obesity used to be good and obesity is now bad, we are all obese and we adore people who are thin, that means something has changed in our culture. Whether biology has changed, I doubt. So now, let's move back to some of the data here. Obesity actually, believe it or not, is also a risk of chronic kidney disease. So I'm not here to say obesity is good. Now, going back to the general population, this is what I showed you initially. The higher is body mass index, the higher is mortality. In dialysis patients, 500,000 of them, it's the opposite. The higher is body mass index, the lower is mortality. And it's quite gradient, it's linear. People in chronic disease states, they are familiar with this data, they don't question it a lot. But 10 years ago, everybody questioned, how is it possible? So the larger you are, the longer, the higher is your longevity as a dialysis patient. And many studies, thousands of patients from 1980s to now 2013, let me show you 3 of them. The first one came from France. So it's not all the American data. And this showed among 1,400 French dialysis patients back in 70s, 1982, what data comes from late 70s, body mass index above 23, mortality was lower. Mortality was higher and higher the thinner the patients were. And more data, thousands of patients, according to a DOP study, international study of dialysis patients, both in the US and Europe, mortality goes down as BMI goes up. So that's the opposite direction, right? Doesn't make sense that instead of this goes up, this goes down. And then people said it's because dialysis patients are all sick. And when they divide dialysis patients into sickest versus healthiest, all 3 are still downgoing. Even the healthier dialysis patients who are more chubby, more fat, more high BMI, they live longer. And here now they're looking at 54,000 patients underweight, going from underweight to normal to morbidly obese. Even morbidly obese patients do better than obese. As you can see, relative risk of death is 0.8, 0.85, 0.9. This is the reference group. That means the normal BMI is now in disadvantage, higher mortality, 20% higher mortality compared to high BMI. And this continues. So now,
I think it's crucial to emphasize that was in hemodialysis patients.
yes. So far, that's a good point. Hemodialysis patients, we have what Dr. Miller is saying that actually 93% of all dialysis patients in the US receive a modality called hemodialysis. The other 7% receive something called peritoneal dialysis. And in peritoneal dialysis, those data exist. Now, I'm going to go beyond dialysis patient actually in 2 minutes. Now, this is this is also linear model, American Journal of Epidemiology. Again, looking at different models, and still we find that we can't find a group where high BMI turns bad. Still, is higher and higher is better. Now, finally, here we found a group, BMI above 45 is a little bit worse than BMI above 40, right? So still, we can't say that we found obesity is bad because still the trend is the opposite direction, right? Now, not only that, what if a patient gains and loses weight? No matter what your BMI is, if you, as a dialysis patient, lose weight, your mortality goes up. If you gain weight as a dialysis patient, mortality goes down. So that's not just BMI, also changing weight, it has the opposite direction. Now, here is the question, is BMI all about fat or not? So if your BMI is high in 2014-13, Does it mean that you have more fat than muscle? We don't know, because your lean body mass is fat and muscle and a lot of other things, right? No, I'm sorry, I should not say lean body mass. Your body mass is lean body mass and fat. And lean body mass is muscle, bone, viscera, and fat is the other part of the what we call non-edema or edema-free fat, edema-free mass. Now, if you look at dialysis patients in general, 2/3 of them have less muscle. So muscle is not a major part of their BMI. However, I've come to believe that if a person with large body size is walking, probably he has more muscle than a thin person, because to walk 200, 300 pounds from here to shopping center, you really need to have a lot of muscle, right? So you can't have high BMI without having some muscle, most of the time. Now here is a study in dialysis patients, 700. The more muscle they have around their arm, the lower is mortality. So this, at least this one makes sense, right? Muscle is good, right? That's why, at least since a lot of people have criticized me and a lot of my NIH grant application has been compromised because of these controversies, here I decided to do some muscle study too, to be back to the mainstream. And then we say if fat is good, muscle is better. So people will be less unhappy. But that's the other way to say that if you don't have muscle, at least have fat, right? That's the politically incorrect way. So now here you can see again, now we are doing more muscle-based data showing that dialysis patients, the more muscle they have, the lower is mortality. This is a surrogate of muscle mass. And here also in a nice way to look at weight loss, weight gain, muscle loss, muscle gain, what we found across these 4 groups, that patients who gain here weight gain and muscle loss, this doesn't help as much as weight gain and muscle gain. And if the gain in weight is mostly based on muscle and fat, that's probably better. And that's what we found. Essentially, both, as you can see here, both weight and muscle has the greatest survival. So these are ways also to, not just to be politically correct, but also to move to the next level to see what's going on, what is going on with this obesity paradox. So, yeah, but his BMI was 37. Imagine if he had gone to one of those UC Irvine clinic, they would have already screened him as morbidly obese. Okay, so now, look at, these are now going out of dialysis patient, as Dr. Miller said, now pre-dialysis patients, CKD stage 3 and 4, there are now emerging data that even earlier CKD patients have obesity paradox. That means high BMI, lower mortality. Now, what about out of kidney disease? Let's just go out and see, are there other population with obesity paradox? The answer is yes, geriatrics. As we all get older and older, this is Framingham data, relatively consistent. This is the impact of BMI and mortality as your 30s and 40s. But once you go to 50s, 60s, 70s, then the impact of mortality becomes 0. And above 70s, in fact, more high BMI is associated with protection. All right? So these are data that are relatively known too, so I haven't discovered them. And so that means that there is association of BMI with mortality, which reverses across certain age. At which age is it exactly a certain age? Is it biologic age? We don't know yet. And then we move to heart failure patients. We have 6 million people with heart failure. In heart failure patients, the obesity paradox is also relatively consistent. You talk to cardiologists, heart failure specialists, they always say that it's amazing. Heart failure patients who are larger, they live longer than thinner ones. And then you go to heart disease and other things, you find that there are emerging data showing that if you get heart attack, in fact, at JAMA 1.5 years ago, if you get heart attack, if you're obese, you're more likely to survive hospital for your heart attack than you're thin, right? This is probably the point where things become reversed. The moment you become a member of one of those chronic diseases, then that's where obesity paradox starts. Here also, long-term mortality post-coronary catheterization. That shows that it's on the other side, favors obesity. Instead of this meta-analysis of being on the other side that's against obesity. So COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, millions of people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the thinner they are, the shorter their longevity. Yeah, and when the COPD patients with chronic bronchitis lose weight, that's a bad sign. When they gain weight, they usually live longer. Rheumatoid arthritis, hundreds of thousands of people. The higher is the BMI, the better survival. These are survival curves, classic survival curves, BMI, lower and lower and lower mortality. It's a nice gradient, worse and worse and worse. So it's believed that in the United States alone, 20 to 40 million people with chronic disease states may have obesity paradox. So therefore, questioning, essentially coming up with black and white guidelines that obesity is bad no matter what, or anybody who comes to your clinic with BMI above 30 screening, just sit down and tell that person to lose weight, may not be the best way. And this is just the beginning. I've been working for a number of years on this area, but this is still this is a very the field is in its infancy. Now here also another study showing that the body fat, as I showed, muscle was good, but also body fat here, a dialysis patient whose body fat is on less than 12% has the worst survival compared to a person whose body fat is 24 to 36%. So what else has reverse epidemiology? Now, the reason I said reverse epidemiology, because when we discovered all these things, also from the literature, people says that doesn't make sense. This is the opposite of cardiovascular epidemiology. And then Joe Korsh at Hopkins, he called them reverse epidemiology. We said, okay, because it's not just obesity paradox, there's also lipid paradox, right? Now, what do you expect me to show you now? Now that you can imagine. And this is, I'm going to show you that high cholesterol is good. Okay, so these are data from 1990, okay, 23 years ago. 10,000 dialysis patients showing that cholesterol up to 300, so cholesterol was associated with better survival. Now more data here, and general population high cholesterol, high LDL. This is actually total cholesterol. Is bad in dialysis patients, high total cholesterol is associated with better survival. LDL the same, as you can see, trend down going with higher LDL. A study giving statins to dialysis patients, randomized trials in Germany, did not show a major benefit of statin in dialysis patient. That means giving statin lowering cholesterol did not improve survival. For the first time in a group of patients where statin therapy did not help was this one. Okay, the third one, this is just a very brief, I show you only 2 or 3 slides, but you can imagine what I'm going to show you, right? Okay, so essentially in the general population, even 2 or 3 units, millimeter of mercury higher blood pressure is bad, but this is the general population, yourself, myself. Dialysis patients, 86% of them have already hypertension. And in them, blood pressure up to 160s or 170s is the best survival. All right? Doesn't make sense, but that's how it is. So it's like a mirror image. That means in dialysis, this is the general population, high blood pressure, mortality exponentially goes up. Dialysis patient, high blood pressure, mortality tends to go down. Low blood pressure, bad. Heart failure patients, the same. If you have a heart failure, if you have anybody with heart failure, lower blood pressure usually is a bad sign for many reasons. So I'm going to bypass this. This is just high blood pressure. The chronic heart failure. So in heart failure patients, high blood pressure, lower. The lower is blood pressure in a heart failure patient, the worse is survival. So homocysteine is, since this homocysteine story is now gone, I'm going to bypass these. And we're discovering more and more of things that bad gone good phenomenon, from glycemic control to a lot of things, right? So if I continue this, then it becomes quite provocative. So that's, I think, enough. And the last 5 minutes I spent on some hypotheses. Why, right? If something is observed, either it's wrong, what we epidemiology call statistical fallacy, confounding, then this is my job as an epidemiologist to figure out, was there a lot of confounding, was it bias, or is it a true robust association? That means, are those associations associated with a truth somewhere, which means biologic plausibility, right? So that's that's the area where we need a lot of research. A number of hypotheses. I go over a few of them. One is in 2000, Stefan Anker from Germany with his student Rauchhaus came with this hypothesis that he feels that it is important to have cholesterol in your blood. That means God put cholesterol or lipoprotein in your blood because it's a defense mechanism. It binds cytokines, and so that bacterial lipopolysaccharides that may come into your blood, they get essentially stuck with the lipoproteins as a scavenger, remove them. If you don't have enough cholesterol, then the lipopolysaccharides in the circulations are free. They activate cytokine cascade leading to endothelial damage and cardiovascular disease and risk. Okay, so that makes sense, and they have also data. And here, again, with Dr. Waziri, we have been working on endotoxinemia. Now, another hypothesis, more and more data in the past 20 years has shown that the subcutaneous fat is not that bad, in fact. A lot of bad cytokines come from it, but a lot of good cytokines come from this too, such as adiponectin. This is called good cytokine. And that's why data actually in the general population shows that subcutaneous fat is associated with better survival compared to visceral fat. And this is something that has been shown. You remember that Italian lady, those two Italian ladies, probably they both had more subcutaneous fat than visceral fat. And here about some epidemiologic understanding that chronic diseases, they usually, when you have a chronic disease, as you progress towards the terminal stage of that chronic disease, more and more patients die. In the United States, we have 20 million people with chronic kidney disease, but only 500,000 on dialysis. So most of these people are dead. So that when somebody's a terminal heart failure patient, a terminal cancer patient, a terminal dialysis patient, that person could have been a very different person. Otherwise, he or she wouldn't have survived up to the last stage of a chronic disease. So it's like natural selection. The person does not represent the natural epidemiology. He or she is already a survivor of a hardship, right? So therefore, you cannot go to him and tell him now you have to lose weight if his BMI was one of the reasons that he survived up to stage 5. Or the only reason he survived up to the age of 90 or 97. So with that comes the competition between overnutrition and undernutrition. Overnutrition is killing our nation, causing diabetes, metabolic syndrome, but look at the time it needs. It usually needs a few decades. I put it 10 years. If you continue eating more with metabolic syndrome burden and everything else, you usually need quite a long time until you get heart attack. But with undernutrition or malnutrition or losing nutritional reserves, the death is imminent, right? So there is a time discrepancy. So if among these chronic disease states people, there are nutritional problems with them, these people are going to be dead. In other words, when this under and overnutrition compete, undernutrition wins the competition. So that's also, we're trying to model this epidemiologically. So again, short-term killers win the competition. So in other words, dialysis patients or cancer patients are not going to be there with you 10 years from now because they are dead of cancer cachexia or wasting syndrome of dialysis. So therefore, that's the area where we have to put more emphasis on things that appear to be paradoxical or not conventional. Now here, I'm going to end with some of these things. One is this slide where we asked dialysis 300 dialysis patients, how's your appetite? And those who said my appetite is poor, their C-reactive protein was the highest. Those who said my appetite is very good, they had the lowest C-reactive protein. That means inflammation was quite evident here. Now here, then after a year, we found that good appetite people had the best survival compared to low appetite. Look at here, 4.74 was the, 4.7 times higher mortality in patients who said my appetite is low. All right, so a simple question, how's your appetite? So that's why I said that it's relevant to what you're doing. Hopefully everybody has good appetite today, sitting here. This is a nice message. Okay, so this is the last two slides. So, and since there have been in the past and currently some interviews and debates, who is reverse? What we call reverse epidemiology or paradox may indeed be the natural epidemiology for mankind. For hundreds of thousands of years, we survived hardship, we survived famine, we survived starvation by being able to store fat, nutritional reserve. And now the chronic disease states are indeed the hardship. We don't have famine, we don't have earthquake, we don't have other disasters. So now we need these nutritional reserves when we have heart failure, when we have metastatic cancer, when we have cancer cachexia, when we have cardiac cachexia. So therefore, the conventional epidemiology is something new, just emerged post-World War II. Until 30, 40 years ago, obesity was considered to be a sign of health. Now we are in excess for a variety of reasons. So despite the detrimental effects of being overweight, obese nations live longer. Actually, the higher is the BMI, the better is life expectancy across the nation. Of course, that could be also questions based on the confounding. Now, the last slide, so reverse epidemiology or obesity paradox, lipid paradox, and racial disparities I didn't talk about, is the hallmark of chronic disease states with wasting syndrome. That means things that are related to cachexia, wasting, and nutritional status. 10 to 20% of the US population may be in this category. Obesity paradox reverse epidemiology is probably not just a statistical fallacy. Probably there is biologic plausibility, but more research is needed. If fat is good, muscle is better. However, preserving fat may be the only feasible option that many terminal disease patients have, many chronic diseases. They probably cannot do jogging or running or cannot go out do weightlifting. So therefore, that's what we have to be at least cognizant or question. And nutritional, anti-inflammatory, antioxidative, anti-cachectic interventions and agents that are emerging are supposed to be the future, at least, or a way to look at some of these things. And more clinical trials are needed. So with that, I would like to acknowledge people who worked in our research group at Harold Simmons Center at Harbor UCLA, which is now at UC Irvine in Orange. And these are some of the students who come and go and work with me. And again, thank you very much.
I think we have time for a few questions.
Yes.
Is there, they didn't touch on it, but I'm sure there's evidence. Is there any evidence that insane ingestion, either during the time period that we're talking about here, with the effective BMI, or physical exercise, either one of those affect the parameter of increased survival?
So you said, is there any chance that end stage?
End stage, or, for that matter,
Or exercise, right?
or exercise
Yes.
affects this phenomenon?
Well, the answer is that there are studies in chronic disease states, including dialysis patients, based on exercise. They have not been shown, they have not been shown pros and cons. Of course, the exercise studies, there's a very small studies, unfortunately. And in my opinion, this 500,000 dialysis patients, $5,000 clinic in the US, we all have to have stationaries while they come 3 to 4 hours for dialysis. They also get something. And Dr. Joel Koppel at Harvard UCLA was doing this. But so far, the data have not been convincing. Now, I'm not aware of other things. I know that for COPD, for pulmonary disease, at Harvard UCLA and in Netherlands, there are two groups working, and they have data. They usually present them that exercise and muscle gaining initiatives or interventions are useful, whether or not they have survival data. Because survival data, then you need to have those data. I know I'm aware of COPD data from Harvard UCLA, one paper that shows survival gain. But this is an area, as you have studied the question, that needs more studies. Yes.
I think what you pointed out is the matter of the competing risk factors. That is, for instance, all of the conditions you cited in
Yes.
which obesity, low cholesterol, low blood pressure, etc., they're all associated with inflammation.
That's right.
Whether it's CKD, whether it's chronic kidney disease, AIDS, rheumatoid arthritis, congestive heart failure, all the rest. And obviously, inflammation kills you faster, as opposed to obesity would take, as you mentioned, decades. So it's a matter of competing risk factors. And of course, inflammation would cause cachexia, weight loss, loss of appetite, and so forth. So I think there may be some surrogacy
That's right.
in terms of somebody who has the disease and would normally be having anorexia and not having as much body fat, etc., is now have it. That means that that person has less inflammation.
That's right.
Therefore, that fast killer is there, and that doesn't
Yes.
mean that
That is
obesity-
etiology. In fact, expanding on what you said, I think Dr. Vaziri's message here is as important, that it's not weight loss or low BMI that kills. Weight loss and low BMI is epiphenomenon to something different, right? To wasting cachexia. And therefore, we can't just, by looking at association, most of these data I showed were all associations essentially,
Right.
most of them, if not all of them. And we can't just say that since you're thin and dying, and since you're obese and you're surviving, that there is cause effect. And we have not gone to the cause effect, you're right. And people have criticized us for good reasons, that these are pure associations. So show me if I gain weight or if I lose weight intentionally, then my mortality goes up and down.
Right.
And we don't have those data.
But I think that
Yes.
there's a lot of room to do that, to have the bench and bedside
That's right.
to address the questions in an intelligent and convincing manner.
Yes, that's
And
where
one
I
other
look forward to.
clarification,
Yes.
you talked about 1 out of 4 or 5 patients on dialysis die. That is not necessarily the case.
Mhm.
In our unit for the last 30 years, we had 7%. 1 out of 12 died. And
Mortality,
that was
that's right.
because of the not following the guidelines, but individualized care
Yes.
and incorporating understanding of biology and pathophysiology in doing the treatment as opposed to following the guidelines like a robot.
That's right.
And so that, I think, a tradition that I hope, and I'm sure under
Mm.
your vision would be sustained and continued.
Yes, Dr. Vazir is saying that even the mortality across dialysis patients, I say in the US is 15 to 20%. At UC Irvine Dialysis Center, mortality was lower. And you're saying that it was because of individualized care rather than following guidelines.
Right.
And I can tell you that, now I don't mean to now expand it on a more negative way, but there are data showing that patients, it's more funny, that dialysis patients who don't adhere to guidelines and don't listen to us, they live longer. Now, if you ever have any patient with kidney disease, the restrictions are huge, dietary restrictions. We always tell them, don't eat this has potassium, this has sodium, this has water, this is huge amount of this or that, this is also water, then you also have diabetes. So there's a long list. Some intelligent patients sometimes ask us, is there anything left for me to eat, right?
Right.
So these are also ongoing discussions. In fact, you're right.
The other thing you mentioned had to do with the inadequacy of the BMI as a defining
That's right.
risk factor. If you go to India, for instance, there are a lot of thin people who have a low BMI,
That's right.
but they have a bulging belly,
Belly,
and
that's right.
they are at the highest risk of cardiovascular
That's right.
disease.
That's
So it's a matter of having more white fat,
Fat and-
which
that's right.
produces inflammatory cytokines.
so the comment is well valid
As
about
opposed
this.
to the Italian lady you showed had a big face. Babies have, that's brown fat.
Yes.
A good, pelvic, not pelvic, but the.
So having the good fat as
good
compared to
fat,
visceral
those
fat,
are,
that's right.
The brown
That's right.
fat as opposed to the white
That's right.
fat.
Yes.
So I think that's a weakness of the BMI definition.
Definitely, I agree. Yes.
I was wondering about the role of metabolism in all of this, since a person's weight is usually also reflective of their metabolism?
Yes.
Since you talked about the increasing weight, usually if someone increases or decreases in weight, that's going
Yes.
to change the metabolism as well. So I was wondering if there was
Yeah, that's a good question because
role in metabolism.
very good question because also and all these are excellent questions because we have had a lot of important questions today, and there is a group working in Switzerland working on, and I do, because of time constraint I didn't show a number of interesting slides about Minnesota study which was done in 1950s, people who were starving to death, volunteers. And then they regain weight. And a group by Dr. Dulo in Switzerland are working on that about the, let's say, when you lose and gain weight, what happens to your energy expenditure? And how are you hypercatabolic, anabolic? And some of his data shows that the higher is your BMI, the more fat you have, the less muscle you burn, and the more protection you have for muscle. And your essentially your energy expenditure shifts from non-fat to fat or from fat to non-fat. As this is one of the ways that he's essentially explaining some of these obesity paradoxes. And you're right, we don't have a lot of data, but one is for sure that when you go to the end stage or to the terminal stage of chronic diseases, as you move, even in the earlier stages, you have higher energy expenditure. And as you become wasted, for example, cancer cachexia, and we know that nowadays it's all about inflammation, oxidative stress, and having a higher energy expenditure than anything else, than having adequate or inadequate food. This is the area where we don't have a lot of data. This is another area, knowledge gap, that more research is needed. Yes.
I think the real lesson of today's beautiful presentation is think outside the box.
Right.
And I think it has an implication for education. I think the day when medical students should learn every fact ever known to man is over. Now that we have the internet, we need to appreciate what we don't understand and then find the answer, rather than having all the answers clogging up our brain and preventing us from thinking outside the box. The other thing I want to say to this rather young audience is, why do we have Medicare coverage for end-stage renal disease and not for end-stage liver, heart, lung, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The reason is that Congress fully expected that there would be federal support for end-stage disease of all sorts, or for illness of all sorts. And it was simply a political matter that brought end-stage renal disease to the fore at a time when there was relatively little dialysis and transplantation.
Mm-hmm.
And when very few, if any, people could afford it. But appreciate that in the context of your understanding of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and the possibility that healthcare reform as presently envisioned will not get us where we need to get. It may be that we need single payer.
Well, one of the ethical aspects was that you had now artificial kidney, you could continue to have sustained life of somebody that if you withdrew it, the person would die, so you're committing this murder. And you don't have that for the heart and liver and brain and the rest. So I think that is another reason why Congress was forced to do that, because we had come up with a mechanism to sustain life that would have otherwise been lost.
Yes, but I suspect you would admit that the same amount of money spent for patients with heart, liver, lung, etc., or in preventive medicine might have far greater benefits for health and than end-stage renal disease treatment. The other thing is, if you want to talk ethics, is what are the ethics of chronic dialysis
Yes.
not being held on Sunday? And for whom is that a benefit?
Well, these are all good questions. I think I really appreciate Dr. Miller and others, and we look forward to more discussion on this.
Absolutely. We couldn't end on a better note than this debate. So thank you so much on behalf of our students and faculty. Thank you. So please hang around. As I mentioned, we have this room for a few more, half an hour or so. We have posters from some of our public health students. And these two topics that we ended with, the policy dimensions of the study, the research opportunities that remain, and the educational goals are really what we call this forum to do today. I wanted to thank all of our distinguished members of the audience, Dr. Vasiri, Dr. Miller, Dr. Maskins had to leave, as well as Larry Wenzel and co. So please welcome again to all of our incoming students. I think this gives you a little taste of the kind of forums that we have on Mondays to have discussions on very hot topics in public health. So please, more food, more drinks, discussion, and post the session. Thank you very much.